Welcome back, book nerds. This is Library Card, the show for people who want to think deeply about the books they read and get inspired to read more. I'm Megan Gliona. I'm here with Brian Brinkman and RJB. Today, we're going to be talking about one of our favorite authors. I think it's fair to say we all feel that way. He's certainly someone who we refer to often on this show. We're talking about Jonathan Franzen and his 2021 novel, Crossroads. Crossroads takes place in the Midwest, and the three of us here grew up there. So we're going to be bringing a lot of our understanding of this part of the country into our discussion today. But before we get into that, how are you guys? RJ, how you doing? I heard do we have a voicemail from someone?
We do have a voicemail, and I'm doing fine. Thank you
Oh,
for asking. Do you want to listen to it right now, or do you want to? You tell me when to play it, and I'm going to be just extremely ready.
I'm ready to listen to it. Brian, how are you doing? Do you want to listen to the voicemail?
I will tell you how I'm doing after we hear the voicemail.
Okay, that seems good.
Okay, I think I might. Me too. Same. Okay, here we
Okay,
go.
good. Okay, good. I'll wait for that.
Let's see if we can do this. I wonder if this will work. I think this should work. Brian, tell us how you are while I get the voicemail queued up.
Well, how I'm doing pertains to literature because
Ooh.
I give myself a gift every August. Throughout the remaining 11 months a year, I am wholly beholden to the two of you and the 750 books that we need to be reading for this podcast. In August, it's me time. And in August, we do Lonesome Dove. There are 4 books to the Lonesome Dove series. Lonesome Dove was the original from 1985, but that is book 3 of 4. So last August, I went back and I read Dead Man's Walk, which was book 1. You meet Augustus McCrae and Call when they're, I think, 19 years old, and they are just starting as U.S. Marshals. And then the second book, which I'm reading right now, Comanche Moon, finds the men in their mid 30s. They've fallen in love. They're in the midst of their time working as U.S. Marshals, as Texas Rangers, going up and down the prairie, hunting down buffalo hump and blue duck, and meeting all the characters that we will find in the Lonesome Dove novel. And so I'm about 100 pages into Comanche Moon. I could not be happier. We've already started insulting Jake Spoon's intelligence. The setting of the canyons in northern Texas are already taking over my worldview. The experience of being on a horse for 12 hours at a time and not being able to understand up versus down. I'm feeling it with you, Gus. So I'm doing great right now.
Nice. RJ, are we ready to listen to this voicemail, or do you want to tell us what book you're reading instead?
I'll do both. First, I'll just tell you quickly.
Oh,
I've been catching up. I've been catching up on books. I finished The Stand, which was the first time I've ever read it. Many people who responded to my post on Instagram when I said I was reading it, several people said that it was their favorite book of all time, which was interesting. So it's definitely like
Wow.
a book that, if you guys are ever ready to tackle it, I mean, we were texting yesterday about Stephen King and his ability to, like, just the way that he constructs stories is so masterful, and it seems almost like he does it without trying, because there's not a lot of flair, there's not a lot of like fancy technique or fancy language. It's just pure story, start to finish. I mean, this was long. It was almost 1,200 pages, so it was like, by the end I'm like, okay, let me, like, tell me what happens.
Yeah.
But and then right after that, I read 2 books in 24 hours. Headshot, which, Megan, I know you've read. That was really fun. And then I read Couplets, which was I read poetry, which I'm
I'm
really
so
proud
proud
of
of
myself.
you.
Really
Yeah,
proud
what
of
did you
myself.
think? That
I
that
thought it was
book is
great.
really influential to me. So I'm excited to hear that you liked it. It's
I
not for
almost
everybody.
want to propose that we do an episode where we talk about couplets and all fours as like
Oh, sick.
two
Yeah,
as
I
like
love
two
that.
sides of the same kind of like life experience, or life moment or transition or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, I loved it. Thanks for the
Love that.
recommendation.
Okay, I'm putting that into our schedule. Not till next year, Brian. Don't worry. Don't worry. It's okay.
2 books in 1 episode. I love it. Well done,
Yeah,
guys.
Hey, to be fair, I read couplets in 3 hours. Like
No,
actually,
it's the shortest book. It's so short.
it felt good also to like check off another book in 3 hours so
It's
that
very
I could
satisfying.
get back on track. Okay, you guys ready for this voicemail?
Yes, we've
I
been
wish you
ready
guys
for
would
it
let
for
me.
a while.
Wish you'd let me play the voicemail. Jesus. All right, here we go.
This is Alex from North Carolina. I just wanted to say I've really been enjoying both the library card and the blockbuster cards, but I almost thought since you're already doing a podcast within a podcast within a podcast, you could do another double down. Could we get a draft of your top favorite book to movie or book to TV show interpretations? Because
So
sometimes
cool.
movie versions of books are terrible and sometimes they're fantastic. It'd just be fun to hear y'all's thoughts. All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Wow.
I mean, that
That's some
is
like deep
what an.
podcast knowledge of us, the way we nerd out. That's
Could you
amazing.
possibly imagine a better voicemail than that? I mean, just
Brian's head is exploding with joy right now.
I love this. I love
if
this. Well
if
done.
we ever did that, my only request would be that we could also talk about like the worst, because there's a Stephen King book that was adapted into a movie or a TV show that was absolutely horrible, which I won't talk about now, but we would have to talk about really big failures in addition to successes, you know?
Well, you could have like a flop category, and you draft
Yes.
like the biggest flop, right? Brian, would that work? RJ, would that work?
This is so great. It would be awesome.
No, this is a really great idea. And there's a specific section on HBO Max that are from pages to the silver
Really?
screen. Uh-huh.
I didn't know
And
that.
it's all books that were turned into movies. And I'll often go there just because, for the longest time, I think I fell into the category of thinking that the book is always better than the film.
Mhm.
And I understand why people say that way. Like there's we're gonna talk about it with this. Like I would almost never want a Franzen book turned into a movie. It's happened and it's not good.
Yeah.
Like there's something about a book like this that you just can fall in page after page after page to these characters, to the setting. But I'm also a firm believer that when handled properly, the medium of film tells the story of the human experience in a way that is as unique as a book does, and does different things that you're looking for. And there are certain moments and certain examples where a good book or a great book becomes an exceptional film. Um, I'm really curious. For example, we talked about Clara and the Sun earlier this year, a book that we
Yeah.
had diverging views on, but they were making a movie out of. And my takeaway from that episode was, I think that this may, for me, work better on the screen than it did on the page. Now we'll see what actually ends up happening. But that's a real thing, that like certain books then become a movie that ultimately reinvents what was possible within that book.
I was just talking about this recently because I was talking about White Noise by Don DeLillo and saying how I have never wanted to watch the movie of that because I absolutely loved the book so much.
Not
And
not that good.
it's not good, right? Yeah. And I
No.
don't want to ruin what's in my head about it. Yeah. I think it would be cool to have a TV series category too, because then I could talk about Normal People, which I love so much as a TV series. You both have not seen that, right? The Sally Rooney
I have
Normal
not, and I
People
just finished my
series?
first Sally Rooney book, and I would be very much open to reading more Sally Rooney.
Well, the series, actually, I've never read Normal People, but the series with Paul Mescal and Daisy Edgar Jones it's amazing. It's
I
absolutely
really like
amazing.
them.
Oh my God. They're amazing. Their chemistry it's legendary. They're still always being rumored to be together because it's incredible. It's so good. Highly recommend. Very sad, but very, very good.
Can I just
Speaking
say if
go
we
ahead, RJ.
I just want to say if the two quick things. One, if we don't do a Lonesome Dove book and TV miniseries comparison, then we're like we've failed in life. Also, I do have The Killers, the movie The Killers, based on the short story in my watch list. So there's two for you guys to think about.
Well,
Yeah.
and I don't think we've formally announced this. Maybe we have on socials, but we are doing a library blockbuster card special for
I have not.
Halloween.
I haven't announced it.
Um,
Do
do you
it.
want me
Do
to
it.
here?
Yeah, do
We are
it. Do it.
we are doing The Shining for Halloween this year. So we're going to read Stephen King's The Shining, and we're going to watch Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And we're going to talk about the difference. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. I'll give you it right now here. Where is this? It is my number 8 on my Letterboxd list, all-time favorite movies ever.
It's so
So
good. I love it. I love that movie.
very
amazing.
And
excited to
I've never
reread the
read
book.
King. This will be my first time.
Wow. And you know who hated
He's
that
on there.
movie, Brian?
Who? Stephen King?
Yeah.
I believe it.
So this is great. Look at this.
Oh,
Thank you
this
for
is
the
gonna be
voicemail, though,
good.
mostly. Thank
Yeah,
you for
thank
the
you
voicemail.
so
Great
much. That was
voicemail.
awesome.
I'll start working on this. This could be a fun draft. We haven't brought drafts over
Yeah.
to the distinguished crowd of Library Card, but if they're asking for it, we got to do it.
I love
Got to
that.
give the
Yeah,
people
it's
what they want.
got to do it. I mean, it's very more sophisticated over here, but maybe they're ready to see, our other side that we have, our draft side, which, gets a little bit dirty, but it's pretty fun. Speaking of getting a little dirty, I right now am reading Lonesome Dove. It's my first Larry McMurtry. I'm finally getting around to read this masterpiece after just years of listening to you two and my husband talk about this book. I'm finally doing it. I've been listening to jokes about pokes and sporting women. And to be honest, that kind of turned me off about the book. And I was worried that this was too masculine and too Western, and I wasn't going to get into it. But it has been fascinating reading this book as a woman. I think he writes so well from a woman's perspective. And I've just been really interested and intrigued by how women found agency in this time when they had little rights and were in such a dangerous environment. I've just been very moved by the women's stories in this book, and also in his ability to weave between narratives seamlessly and drop you into them completely. I just love learning about the history and the geography through fiction. So I'm really enjoying it. I have about 250 pages left, and I'm kind of already sad about it being over. And I was actually thinking yesterday that I don't even know if I want to admit this out loud, but that it may top my number 1 book that I've read this year, but I'm not sure yet. And that is a little bit disheartening because my number 1 book that I've read this year is my favorite author of all time. It's Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I reread 100 Years of Solitude, and it's interesting in the context of the book that we're talking about today because Marquez he's a laborious read at times, but I'm so drawn to his deeply poetic and magical way that he sees the world. But McMurtry is so readable. And I think it's interesting thinking about that with Franzen too, because Franzen is someone who is incredibly technical, but also immensely readable, particularly in this novel. So it's exciting to think about that, but I'm loving Lonesome Dove. So thank you for encouraging me to read it. It's been great so far.
Robert Duvall said that playing Gus McCrae was the greatest role of his entire life, and that he lived in that man, like in that character, for the entire making of the Lonesome Dove miniseries, and that it changed his approach to acting from there on out. And this is a man who was in Godfather 1
Godfather.
and 2.
One of my favorite actors of all time, Robert Duvall. Amazing. All right, let's get into this. Let's get into Crossroads. I'm going to give a summary, and I will say this summary has spoilers, massive spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, I think you should not listen to this summary. Crossroads is the 6th novel by Jonathan Franzen. It's set in a fictional Chicago suburb in the early 1970s. This book follows the Hildebrandt family as each member of the family approaches a sort of crossroads in their lives. The novel follows Russ and Marianne, whose marriage is close to collapse, and their 4 children, Clem, Becky, Perry, and Judson. The first section is titled Advent, and the 400 pages take place on one day in late December. And it follows Russ as he flirts with Frances, a widow in his parish, and clashes with his fellow minister Rick over running of the popular church youth group Crossroads. While this is happening, we also learn about Marianne, who is secretly seeing a therapist and sharing about her past in which she has had an affair with a married man and a psychiatric breakdown. Their son Perry has been dealing weed but is attempting to stop and has joined Crossroads along with his sister Becky. Becky is super popular and falls for an aspiring musician in the group named Tanner. The son Clem, the oldest son, has been in college and he's had a sexual reawakening, but has decided to drop out and enlist in Vietnam for moral reasons. The second section of the book is titled Easter. And in this section, Russ and Frances consummate their affair while on a mission trip to Arizona. On this trip, Perry overdoses on cocaine, to which he's become addicted. Marianne has gone to California to see the married man she once had an affair with, only to decide he is no longer who she wants. She's driven back into her marriage after managing the crisis of Perry's overdose with Russ. Finally, Becky and Tanner take a trip to Europe, and Becky becomes pregnant and becomes a mother rather than attending college. Becky becomes estranged from her parents as they focus on taking care of Perry, who is in and out of expensive rehabs. This causes Russ and Marianne to be strapped financially, so they move to a posting in rural Indiana. The book ends with Clem spending his time traveling through Central and South America as a day laborer, and he finally returns to his hometown to reunite with Becky and possibly his parents. Crossroads is the first volume in a projected trilogy titled A Key to All Mythologies, and Franzen intends this trilogy to span 3 generations and trace the inner life of our culture through the present day. As someone who grew up in Michigan, and I was in a church youth group in the Midwest, although in the 90s, not in the 70s, but I still felt such a kinship and a seeing of oneself in this text. Every scene at the church, I pictured my Presbyterian church where I fell in love with this idea of someone or something that I could turn to and always rely on, but only if I did exactly what they wanted or at least begged for mercy when I didn't. And this idea of how religion looms in this book felt so true to me. My youth group was also a place where I tried smoking for the first time and I made out with a boy for the first time. So this was a place that held these universal secrets that I was interested in, but then also gave me exposure to real world secrets and passions that I was like eager to discover. So I found this portrayal of Midwestern American religious experience. I really related to the struggle with the religious ideologies in this book, and with this idea of wanting to live more freely and balancing those two. So you both grew up in the Midwest. Brian, you grew up really close to where this book is supposed to have taken place. Did this book mirror some of what you experienced growing up? Did it ring true to you? Or was this not something that you saw reflected in your own life growing up?
It felt like a mirror.
Mhm.
Yeah, so Franzen was born and spent early childhood in a house right around the corner from my parents' house, and apparently wrote this book set fictionally in the town I grew up in. Um,
Wow.
and I knew that. I had people telling me, like, "You gotta read this, like, you're gonna find so much, within this." And when I finally picked it up, 'cause I love Franzen, he was one of those. I think the first thing I read from him was Freedom, and then I read the corrections almost immediately afterwards. Um, and it was one of those experiences where you're like, "Okay, this is the person I should have been reading for the last decade," what was going on? And then I hadn't read him since I read the corrections. And, you know, the town I grew up in, and these kinds of Midwestern towns, there is a clear hierarchy, there's a clear culture that you really have to adhere to um, fit in, to be a part of. Um, and within that, there's a lot of kind of loneliness, and I don't want to say trauma, but there is this sense of, if you don't fully fit into this, like, what are you supposed to do? Because you have all the material
Yeah.
goods and all of the opportunity and all of the community that literally anyone could ask for. And every time I go back to the town I grew up in, I'm reminded, like, how fortunate I was to grow up where I did grow up. Um, but I never went to the extremes that Perry goes to in this. I never went to even the extremes that, like, Clem goes to in this, but I definitely related to the children in this book who were clearly of the mindset that they were fortunate to be where they were and to be where they were at that point in time, from a physical standpoint, from a um, relative wealth standpoint, even though, one of the things they get into in this book is how separated the pastor's family was from, a lot of the wealth in the community. But, like,
Mhm.
this sense of security and of community, that they were fortunate to have that, but they all, for varying reasons, felt removed from it. one step removed from in a lot of ways. And I related immensely to that challenge from a teenage standpoint. I haven't lived in the town I grew up in since I was 18. I go back maybe once a year at this point in time. And every time I go back, I definitely feel the way that this book made me feel. Like reading this book over the holidays in my own house with my kids around, in my, with my own family, it brought back a lot of really challenging feelings, but also like a nostalgia for a life that I once led that I don't have anymore. Because even in the suburbs I live in here in Denver, um, there is something very different from what you would experience in a suburb in the Midwest. Like this book feels very rooted in a time and place. So um short answer, yes, I felt an immense amount of relation to this overall book.
It's hard to put a finger on it too. I was listening to Franzen talk about the Midwest and kind of how hard it is to pin down what it is about the Midwest that makes it feel the way it feels. And he was explaining it's the light, it's the weather, it just is something that he knows, and that's why he writes about it. And I think that that's something the three of us can probably relate to, in the sense it's sometimes hard to articulate what makes the Midwest the way it is. But I also deeply identified with this feeling of self-righteousness that a lot of the teenagers have. And you realize when you're growing up in America in a place that's pretty safe and in a pretty privileged way, you have the space to feel very self-righteous. I felt very much annoyed at how everyone was living, how everyone was the same, how everyone went to church, how everyone looked the same, acted the same, expected the same things in life. It bored me to death. And I thought it was so, you know, I was very unimpressed with it. And looking back, it's interesting because I think that's how Clem feels a bit about it. And it was interesting to see that reflected at my own age now. How about you, RJ?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, and yeah, I agree with everything Brian said. First of all, I just want to say, like, I mean, the fact that this is the first of a trilogy that is going to be called A Key to All Mythologies, which is a reference to George Eliot's Middlemarch, is just like, could you possibly be the most stereotypical novelist in America any more than like you already are? It's just
Totally. He said
it's just
he
so
did that
perfect.
too because he like dies while he's writing in Middlemarch. And
Yeah.
so he's like, I'm 62, like I might not finish it, so I might die when I'm writing it. It's just
I
so
mean,
funny.
I've read almost everything. Like I've read, Purity and Freedom and the Corrections and even the early books and Crossroads. So I love Franz, and I think he's like the prototypical American novelist. When you think
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
a novelist, it's him. But I just think it's so funny. Middlemarch, you hear Middlemarch references, and you're in like a different intellectual zone. But yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, I think he's like much kinder to these characters than he is to some characters in his other books.
Totally.
Like I think there's something that's really soft about his treatment of these characters compared particularly to like Purity and the Corrections and Freedom. I mean, there's so much I mean, these are all like they're all going through whatever they're going through, but it feels like it's treated a lot more gently, but not in a bad way. Like it feels like a lot more humanity he gives to these characters as opposed to some of the characters in his earlier books. Although I'm not sure that might just be my interpretation. I don't know if you guys agree, but it
No, I
felt
agree.
Oh
very
yeah.
felt like even the affairs and the stuff that happens in a lot of the books, it felt very like so much more empathetic and so much more human than a lot of the other books that he's written. And I wonder, is that I don't know what that's about, but it also could just be like this kind of hazy softness of the 70s, which I think feel in so many different ways reading this book. It's but yeah, I mean the Midwest thing is I've tried to communicate that recently in writing, trying to communicate why people leave the Midwest and never come back, and
Yeah.
it is about like the constant grayness, and there are things that are just like
Yeah.
hard to put into words, but that are really, I think unique to that part of the country. That is, I think he captures well in a lot of the ways, and I think a lot of this stuff happening in the book, at least in I think in the first part around Christmas and around the holidays, that just is like the holiday season in the Midwest he just captures that perfectly. I mean, it's all really, really moving and so skillful. It's hard to like find anything wrong with a book like this that brings you along with these characters, but also gives them kind of the right amount of ups and downs. Like the way you were describing the summary, Megan, it sounds almost like paint by numbers. It's like one kid has a drug overdose and one girl is
Yeah.
like, it's like all these things, but when you read it, it blends really well, and it works so well. It's a great vehicle for like exploring humanity, I think.
Yeah, and I think that what you said about him being kinder to the characters is so true. I think in his earlier novels, and his writing in general, he's been very open about how he felt like he wanted to change the world and comment socially on the world. And I think that his ability to kind of pivot that desire into his nonfiction and his essay writing, and then allow his fiction writing to open up as to more psychology and character. And he said that the writing of this book made him realize that he wanted to be a novelist of character and psychology and not a novelist of form and commentary. And you see that play out so much. And I think that's why this is my favorite Franzen book I've ever read, because it just dives so deep into the interiority. I mean, it's 400 pages of one day. So like,
Mm.
that they're going so deep into these characters. And it's funny that you say that about the predictability of it, because I kept thinking these characters are so believable and so interesting, and it's kind of sometimes you kind of know what's gonna happen to them, like, when Becky meets Tanner, that she's gonna fall for him, and this, like, there's gonna be this fall from grace from this, like, perfect popular child. In her eyes, she's been, like, this perfect popular kid, and she's gonna end up, like, she's planned everything out perfectly, and then things are going to slowly start to go apart, but it's still you're still sitting there with like bated breath while you're reading, and it's almost the inevitability. And we talk about this on the podcast with plot, how certain things in plot can seem inevitable but still feel exciting and thrilling when you're reading them. And that's how I feel like his character development is in this book. And I don't know that there's a lot of people that can write characters that way, where it feels inevitable where they're going, but you're still shocked and excited by it. I think that's something that's just absolutely incredible in this book that he does with character development.
Yeah, I think that there's the kindness he has to these characters is so different from what he was doing in the corrections, where
Yeah.
pretty much every character that you meet in that book within the first 20 minutes or the first 20 pages, you are focused entirely on their flaws and why their flaws are inherently kind of both their own fault, but also their parents' fault and also society's fault, but also their fault. Like he reminds you that like these people have chosen to be the way that they are. And I think the difference is here, he does this from the jump. There's a scene where Russ is driving these women from the parish back from they did service work on the south side of Chicago. And I can't remember exactly how it happens, but at some point he recommends an album, and he does it in a way that is too cool for him as a character, but is also the only way that you could recommend this is by being too cool. But this guy is not cool at all. He's like the biggest, like he's a pastor who loves his family, but also is like falling desperately in love with a younger woman around him, and like trips over himself every time he wants to speak, and like can't fully connect with the kids back at their church. And it's just like this one little moment where you see all of the flaws of this character, and you ultimately like see where this is going, that he is going to pursue this woman, and it is not going to end the way that he wants it to end. Um, but rather than blaming him from the jump, he makes it even worse by pulling you into empathy for this character and love for this character. And it's something that just I don't think it was missing necessarily from his earlier stories, but like you can see it in this book that there's an actual love for these characters in spite of some of the awful things that they're going to do. it's not so much anyone's fault that they act the way that they act. It just is the way that life goes. And it really reinforces that like complex, dark, terrible things can happen to people. And it's not necessarily anyone's fault. And I think that that is a whole new space for him. And it gives a ton
Mhm.
more depth to these books. It takes them out of, he Freedom is set in Obama era Minneapolis. Corrections, I think, was set in modern day various parts of America. This, he said, he could not write during modern America because he hadn't wrapped his head around it, and he felt as though the 70s, the early 70s, were the closest parallel to what we're living through right now. And so he had to write in a time period that was slightly removed from where we are today, but still allows him to look at like what does society at large do to people and what does human nature do to people.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm missing when I read, this sounds mean, but Taffy Brodesser Acne. Like, I'm missing a compassion for the characters that,
Totally.
to me, makes it a richer experience. And I kept thinking that when I was reading the book, that is similar to the bee sting. When you read a book when characters are doing something wrong, but you still are rooting for them, that's just that to me is the best writing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like these, there's, well, also just like Franzen doesn't really do satire, nothing,
No.
But he's
there's nothing,
hilarious, though. But he's
yeah,
really
but it's
funny.
like, it's serious satire.
It's high-minded.
If
Yeah,
that makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree with that. That's fair. That's a fair counterpoint. I'll take
but
that for sure.
I'm still defending the number one book I've read this year. I will defend it
I'm
to the
just still
death
trying to knock
until I
it
read a
down.
book that's better, which maybe that'll happen. We still have, several months of the year left.
You still have like
I
30
think
books to read. So
Megan, I thought the stuff that the way that he treats the relationship between Russ and the woman, what's the woman's name? Sorry,
Francis.
Francis.
Mhm.
I think the album thing was part of it, right, Brian? Was that during that?
Yeah.
So,
That was
and
the
it's
first time you
the,
meet them.
and it's the
Yeah.
title of the, it's Crossroads, right? Is the album.
Yeah.
So Robert
Yes.
Johnson. So,
Yes.
Oh,
Thank
right.
Yeah.
That but that whole section, I mean, whenever they go to that kind of like dynamic between him and Francis, I thought is like really well done. It like I was thinking about Intermezzo because Brian just finished it, but kind of describing these moments between people that have, there's a lot that's obvious that happens, but then there's a lot that's not obvious. I just think like pulling out the things that are so unique about those kind of moments. I think that's like one of the things that he does best. And in this, that dynamic, I think, is what like stuck with me the most in terms of the story.
That's a fascinating dynamic, and I think he paints it really well. I think there's a way that relationship can seem really icky, but to me it seems, I really like Russ as a character. I know that I'm probably singular in that, but I just think that he's an interesting character because he struggles the most, I think, with this idea of self-gratification and morality. And he does some slimy things for sure, but he's also the one that's done the most for others in his profession and in his work in civil rights and for anti-war movements. He's actually been like living the kind of life, like he's given up, a lot of financial opportunity. He spends his time like, taking care of sick and old people, but yet he just wants to feel good too, and to me it's like the most human and the most sad. There's a line that I want to read a line that he writes about Russ that just absolutely stopped me in my tracks. And he's talking about, this is when he's with Francis, and I think it's when they're in Arizona on this mission trip. The dress had slipped down her shoulder without exposing a bra strap. The skin of her upper back, which he'd never seen before, was smooth and lightly freckled. It, too, was real, and it gave him a pang of nostalgia for the safety of his fantasies. That is just amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah. And it's just, I think Franzen, the way that he can get so deep inside someone's head is pretty singular to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think like what you're saying about Russ, it's interesting because I think this is one of the biggest accomplishments of this book is the fact that you have a guy who I think 20 years ago he would have written about him with a little bit more satire than he typically has.
Mm.
Like he would like you think about the characters from uh the corrections, they're all very transactional. And
Yeah.
Russ is and even in Freedom, I seem to recall that the father, like there were still aspects of him where you were like so many of those characters were like coming out of like 90s America where like showing how good you were was no longer cool. And so what was cool was like knowing a ton of information. And even if you were a bleeding heart liberal, you still had to have like a nice car to like, back up the fact that like you made money, but you also gave, your time by feeding the poor type of thing. And Russ, as you said, like it's clear living in this town that he, based on the choices he's made, has to has to do without, but he still wants things. And yet at the same time, all of the good deeds he does and all that he sacrifices, he still can't get like teenage kids on his side. He still can't get the community to like rally behind him. Like he still deals with and this like full 3D picture that you get of him is someone who is trying their best, is really sincere, is not connecting with people in the way that you would think they would for the amount of work that they're putting into it. But the one person that he is connecting with is untouchable. And that that entire experience kind of like twists his journey throughout this overall story in a way that like it makes you as the reader feel a lot of empathy for him even when he's doing things he shouldn't be doing.
Are there other characters that both of you connected with the most or were the most interested in their stories, I guess? RJ, what about you?
I mean, I think they were all somewhat like predictable, I think, in the way that we're talking about, you know what I mean? So I don't think, but not in a bad way at all. It was just sort of like, I felt like I knew where I was going. Like you said earlier, Megan. I think Becky that's the daughter's name, right? I think that
Mhm.
the daughter, I think her like journey was the most interesting to me, but um, only because she was at this like, I mean, they were all at these like crossroads, right? That's the whole point. But I think
Yeah.
hers was much more like of a life crossroads. Like the addiction stuff is interesting and powerful, I think, but it's also like a kind of like a back and forth dealing with this something that is on someone's back for so long is sort of less interesting to me than like someone who's at this real um like important turning point in their life.
Mhm.
I mean
I
the
get that.
backstory of the wife too is just like, I mean,
She blew me away. I loved
crazy,
Marianne's story. Yeah.
crazy.
She
Yeah,
kind
I
of
think
feels the closest to like a Taffy Brodesser Ackner
yes.
type of character,
Like
but I think you
exaggerated.
very exaggerated, like huge trauma that like
Yeah,
overshadows the trauma of everyone else around her, and so it becomes all
totally.
consuming in a way. Um, but what were you going to say?
I just found her storyline fascinating because there are these things that as a woman and as a mom and as someone who spent time just being a mom, um, quote unquote, it I know what that does to you psychologically, and I also loved her storyline because I never knew what was gonna happen with her and what she was gonna do. She's such a loose cannon in some
Yeah,
ways, and I
yeah,
think that, like, I just the scene of her walking back from this therapist's office and, like, smoking cigarettes and feeling, like, this sense of, like, wanting to take agency in this way that's, like, destructive and, like, also, like, I just related to it a lot, and I found it fascinating how he wrote about her, and I think that her backstory is wild, and it's true, Brian, it's so traumatic, and it's, like, to the fact that she has had to like push that down and secretly go to therapy about it, and her relationship with her therapist is fascinating too. I thought Marion was just, I couldn't wait to hear more about what's going on with Marion. Like she was just unbelievable. And then she like takes her kid to Disneyland and like all under this like guise to find this man that she had this affair with like 30 years earlier. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason why she then doesn't go back with him is so face value and is so like
He's just like not
comedic.
attractive anymore.
Yeah, she's like, "What have I been dreaming about? Like, are you kidding me?" Which like there's like 200 more pages that you could explore in that experience
Yeah.
as well. I do think like I think I forget what you said this, but like the setups for these characters and what they're going to go through is pretty basic level stuff, which I think for anyone trying to get into reading a lot of really good literature, or anyone trying to get into writing should be really reassuring that like probably the best writer in America like found kind of the most stereotypical like, you know, middle-aged dad going through an affair, you know, kid in suburban America who gets into drug dealing, daughter who, you know, loses, you know, any sort of understanding and faith in her family, so on and so forth. Like, but the Perry dynamic, the one thing I will say about it, there were
Mm.
two moments in particular, um, because like growing up in the suburbs, like most kids I knew were like generally nice, good kids who like maybe smoked pot 5 times in their lives, went on, got really solid banking and finance jobs, and moved back to that community and like live a very quiet, happy, you know, like pretty normal life that like on the outside looks really good. And you knew of a Perry, like you grew up knowing these types of kids who they had the brain power to survive outside of the safety and security of where we currently lived. Um, they had the wherewithal to like live in that kind of underworld, but also the safety and security that they grew into was always going to put them in a position where there was always going to be like a personal challenge as this became more complex. And we see this happen with
Mm.
Perry. But I was also thinking about him because the back half of the book, it gets so fucked up for him. And it gets like he clearly like steps into a world he does not belong in at all. And I don't want to give anything away here for what I'm about to say, but um, there was a book I read back in 2023 called Ohio, by Stephen blanking on his last name, but it's an amazing, very Franzen-esque book that I would advocate for us talking about on this podcast. It's the book that kind of like kickstarted all the reading I've done since then. Um, what the reason I bring it up is the stuff that happens with Perry really drives the plot of this book. And it really
Mhm.
reminded me that because this happens in Ohio, that you get like a really good book gives you like 300-400 pages of these characters developing, living life, so on and so forth. And then at a certain point before you even are ready for it, the plot kicks in. And the back half of
Mm.
the book, you get this real sense from Perry that he is driving the story now. His actions are what is driving the story, what his choices he makes are. And that happens with a certain character in this book, Ohio, which leads to like one of the most joyous experiences you could ever have in reading, where the last 120 pages you simply cannot put down. Not even because of the characters anymore. It's just because the plot is so riveting. And that is just like an added testament to this book beyond all the examinations of Midwestern America in the 70s and how they relate to modern America and what all these characters are going through. Like what he's actually experiencing live in the moment just, you know, blew me away as I was reading through this book.
Yeah, for on a personal note, that hit me so hard because I knew someone in my life who was incredibly smart like Perry and also had incredibly huge problems with drugs, and seeing that and watching those decisions be made is just so hard. It's so upsetting. But I agree, there's something about Franzen where he's really able to go so deep with characters, but also he's immensely readable and he can just move his plot so fast. And I think that speaks to just his ability I was thinking a lot about his syntax and the way he uses language in this book because it's very complicated. His sentences are sometimes so long, but they never feel labored. And I am just blown away by his ability to do that. And I was reading an interview with him, and he was talking about um, the interviewer actually noted that he had written a section of one of his sentences was in perfect iambic pentameter,
Hmm.
and he asked him if he knew that, and Franzen's like, "No, I had no idea I did that." And he's like, "But I think if you really want to write excellent fiction, you have to read a lot of poetry." And he was
Mm.
talking about how much poetry he's read, and I think that somebody who reads a lot of poetry learns to use language in a way that you just can't if you don't. So I think thought that was really interesting. But I do think that adds a rhythm and makes his pacing really singular. And I agree that the end of this book is just, I mean, the whole book's so readable, but the end is pretty page turnery. It's it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I mean, it's something I think we all discuss independently, and I think we all probably wrestle with it a little bit. Like, there is a debate between form and like breaking form, and also just telling a really good story.
Yeah.
And you know, I we talked about this with like we're talking about this with Lonesome Dove. Like that is very much of a airport novel disguised as a classic. And I
Yeah.
say airport
Classic
novel is
form.
like, yeah, I say airport novel is like a total like not a I'm not trying to shit on it. It's one of my favorite books I've ever read. But like when you read it, you're like, is this really good? Or am I
Yeah.
just like stuck to and I think Crossroads has that towards the end where you're like, is this pulp? Or am I like just like totally swept away in this plot? Like
Yeah.
um I read a review. I just rewatched The Godfather 1 and 2, and someone was like, "Let's call this what it is. It's the greatest pulp story ever told on screen." And I watched it with that perspective of like, yeah, this isn't like the deepest stuff ever, but when you take a compelling subject and you explore it with these kind of layers and this kind of depth, it's fully, um, it's fully a classic at that point in time. And I think Franzen writes in that way where like part of the debate that happens in my head when I'm reading him is like, did he just know what's in my head and he's putting it on the page
Yeah.
here? Like what is going
Exactly.
on here? And you get that throughout this where like the last 100 pages, you're just like, this is exactly where the plot needed to take us. Is that too easy? Or like, did you just do the right thing and it happened to be a classic like this?
I think that's the case. I think that, some of these writers are just so good that even if they stick to a super traditional form, it just works so well. And it's interesting, the books that RJ was speaking about at the beginning of the episode, Headshot and Couplets, completely take on form. They completely use form and structure in a way that's pretty revolutionary in my eyes. And that is part of the magic of those books. But sometimes you don't need to do that. Sometimes you just have a really great story and you can just tell it so well. So one thing I really wanna make sure we talk about is that I really wanna talk about the religion and the religious aspect of this book as a
Sure.
theme. So I'd love to hear if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up my parents were still very devout Christians. I grew up in a religious family. I grew up Catholic. Um, I didn't really know anyone who didn't go to church when I was a kid. It was just like a normal part of growing up. I went to Sunday school. I went to Monday evening CCD throughout grade school. And then in middle school, I joined a youth group actually called Crossroads,
Stop.
which yeah, yeah, like the parallels here. It's wild. Um, which was very similar to what they're describing here. Was Sunday evenings we'd meet at a designated family's house. There were 12, 14 kids there, all you know the cool thing was, like, you'd have, like, some friends, but then there'd also be, like, people I just kind of knew from classes or knew from I went to a very big high school. There were 800 kids that graduated in my class. Like, I did not know
Wow.
everyone I went to high school with, but, um you'd kind of peripherally know some kids, and then you're like, "Oh, cool, your parents sent you," and you'd bond over, that sort of thing. Like what you're talking about in terms of like youth group outings and like everyone kind of getting into subversive things, and then like someone brings pot, and someone comes with like a magazine that we're not supposed to be looking at in the cabin. All those sorts of things started to
Yeah.
happen. It's like it was like going to summer camp for me, where it was like this very pure privileged experience of having this type of communal connection, but then also like realizing we're all growing up and we're all changing, and this is the place to experiment in that sort of way. um and the religious aspect, especially now looking back on where I grew up, because I live in a suburb here in Denver, but like it's a much more agnostic place than where I grew up.
Hmm.
Religion, Sunday afternoons, there were so many churches in our area that you would hear church bells throughout the entire day. Um, Connecting with people and getting together from a social event standpoint was both religious, or it was based around like federal holidays. Like those were the times you got
Hmm.
together with people. Um, and then and I think about this every time I'm back home, part of what makes that area work, admittedly, is the church aspect. And it is something that RJ mentioned, this like the desire for Midwesterners to leave the Midwest. I think part of that is based on religion and based on the
Yeah.
fact that you are born into security, safety, prosperity here. And part of the trade-off there is that you have to, thank God for all that you've been given. And where I'm at looking at this at 40 versus where I was at 13, 14 are two completely different places. And I was definitely more in the Perry camp of things as a teenager than I am now, but I've also not like fully gone to like the rest level of things. I'm not a practicing Christian at this point in my life. It's just not something that's like become a part of my life even as I've aged. But I think my appreciation for it and my understanding of the necessity of it in this type of community has only grown as I've, had kids, gone through trials and tribulations, and see what it takes just to like hold down a life in a relatively safe and secure place. So I don't know if that exactly answers
Hmm.
your immediate question, but like I'd be fascinated to dive into this.
Yeah, very similar. As I mentioned a little bit at the top, I grew up in outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, so a much smaller suburb, a much smaller city than Chicago, but very similar in that everyone went to church. My parents are more, they're from a little bit of the counterculture. They were in college in the 60s and 70s. Like they were in college during my dad went to Woodstock, and he went there to, protest the Vietnam War. They were very much in that and of that era. So they're more liberal
When
than
were
a
when
lot
were
of
your
the
parents
people.
born?
My parents were born in 1949 and 1950.
Okay, my parents are
The
53 and 56, and I wonder
Oh,
like
so not
my parents are very they were less countercultural. Like they were, early 20s when Reagan was elected, and that kind of like shifted them politically and
yes.
also like the cultural like aspect that came along. I don't know if your parents went through that.
A little bit. I mean, my parents have always held on to their fairly liberal stance, but it was very muted. My parents were much more interested in like providing for us. And I remember I was obsessed with the counterculture, and I was writing a paper for my senior year history class. And I was writing a paper on the impact of the counterculture on contemporary American society. And I interviewed my dad, and I have a videotape of this interview. And I interviewed him and asked him why he sold out to the man. And he was very gracious to me in the interview. But now that we talk about it, he's like, so you could, have that car that you were driving and you could live in this house. And it's very funny. But they held on to that. And so they're both of them not super religious, but they understood the importance of kind of like a religious connection to community, similar to what you're saying. So we went to a Presbyterian church, which was more socially liberal, and almost all of my friends went to the Catholic church. So I was the only one that didn't do CCD. That, when I went to church with my friends, I couldn't get communion. It was like a big thing, and I remember feeling very strange about that. But I was really interested in religion as a kid, and when I was 12 and 13, was going to church a lot. I asked to be confirmed in the Presbyterian church. You have to ask to do it. And I did. And so I went to all the classes, the confirmation classes, and I was confirmed. And I joined a youth group. I don't know if we had a name. I can't remember it, but it was really important to me. And I started writing a journal to God when I was 12. And I kept a journal to God that I would write every night. I read the entire Bible, and I would write passages from it and notes to God every night, from when I was 12 until I was about 17. And it's pretty intense to read. I have read them, and my searching for deeper meaning and looking to understand what was behind everything. It's pretty impressive for how young I was, and how interested in, universality and this idea of something larger than me. But it also, I realized, was insanely patriarchal and also like incredibly steeped in control and this idea of deferring responsibility to someone else. And I became very disillusioned with religion in that sense. And I also felt very judged in the community because my mom was a teacher. She started not going to church as much because she worked. She had 3 children, and people would question where my mom was and like if she was a good person because she wasn't at church in the morning. And my mom is the most religious out of anybody in my family. And it was just, to me, I started to realize that there was a lot of social hierarchy and judgment involved in church that really turned me off. And
Yeah.
also, I just started to experiment with more countercultural things. But I think what's interesting about how he deals with religion in this book is that, to me, it's not really necessarily about the idea of religion. It's really about how we apply morality in our own lives. And what does it mean to be a good person? How can I be a good person without sacrificing my own needs and wants? How can I take care of others and also take care of myself? And I think we talk about that a lot in the pod. I think this is a theme that goes through a lot of the books that we love. This idea of gratification and goodness and like where they intersect. And Franzen has a quote that he was talking about how what he's really interested in is this fundamentally irrational basis for everything we think and do. And I think there is an interesting angle that he takes in this book. I don't know. What do you think about this idea of like this morality as being kind of one of the main themes of the book?
I mean, I think it's the strongest aspect of the book because I think that the questions he's asking, like Russ's kids are clearly not very happy with Russ. And there are things that they want that they cannot have. His wife's clearly not very happy with him. Their relationship is not going well. Um, the church that he works at and the livelihood that he tries to provide for his family is an endless struggle. Um, Even the work that he's doing in Arizona ends up receiving an incredible amount of backlash from the kids, as well as from the people that are living on the Navajo reservation. And so, like, at every step, his actions, which should speak beyond anything that he feels and thinks, are constantly being tested and questioned and um, being challenged. And then he kind of is dealing with this endless question of like, well, can like one of these things just work out for me? And then anything amoral that I feel or want will probably go away. Like I can table that if I'm able to just like get some satisfaction out of all these things that I'm working through.
Mm.
And I think what this book ultimately wrestles with, and like, it's interesting because what you speak about, your experience with religion and like the status aspect of it, like I definitely relate to all of that. And a lot of that pushed me away from it as well. And I remember when this book was announced, I think it was announced in late 2020. And when it specifically said that the main character was a pastor, I was just like, I don't think this is going to be for me. And I'm
Yeah,
so
that's it.
glad I'm so glad I got past that because that is like clearly a thematic undertone of this book. But like, I guess as I kind of thought about this book when I was reading it, when I finished it, like to me, this book speaks to the fact that you can, like, I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer here. I think ultimately the decision he ultimately makes with Francis is in reality like the most amoral thing that he does. And it doesn't work out for a variety of reasons. Um, but like there's a part of me when I think about that and I think about what he represents and what he's up against and what challenges he's dealing with while trying to do good, it kind of speaks to the this idea of like why keep fighting this good fight at every second of every day
Yeah.
when the reality is you can fight this and it will only lead to more challenge, more sadness, more struggle on his end. And it really paints what happens to him as less of I don't want to say, well, as less of like an amoral action and more of just kind of like a tragedy of him trying to be the best person he can possibly be in a world that won't really allow him to do that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Franzen's really playing with the gray area here and writing about it in a really brilliant way because I think the complexity of middle age is really so much about this struggle to you think that when you're young that you're just going to go along your track, and if you do the right thing and you work hard and you're nice to people, that things are going to work out the way that they should or that they want them to. And then life comes at you and you realize that life is so much more complicated than that, and you end up making decisions or being put in a place to make decisions that you never thought you'd have to make. And I think Franzen's really asking the reader to question beliefs they may have about morality and think about right and wrong and decide that in my opinion, I think it's really hard to judge anyone because we never know what people are going through. And what's cool is that in a book like this, you get to see what these characters are going through. You get to live inside their head. You get to understand why Russ is doing this. And even though parts of it are wrong, are maybe not the right thing to do, you see why he's doing it and how he's just trying to grab that little piece of feeling good in a space like you explained that he has no one is happy with this guy, and he's like a pastor, he's like working so hard to be good to people. So I think it's really fascinating, and I absolutely love the way that he paints this, and it's something that I'm really interested in all of my reading these days, is just reading about these gray areas. And I'm just excited that contemporary novels are digging into this. I think The Bee Sting did this really well, and I think DeLillo does this really, really well. You know, family dynamics, deep psychological character study. It's just, to me, very it's what I want to be reading about.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like one thing I kept reading about was the criticism of this book. and a lot of
Oh,
the
I didn't
criticism
read a
that
lot of that. What is it?
it kind of like this book is praised, but it also receives some criticism from like some pretty prominent publications that say the characters were muddy compared to his past works. His writing is too focused on the grand sweep of history. Some characters said that his writing was lackluster and that the sex scenes were awkward, which to that last part, duh.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, the whole setup for that sex scene is like completely awkward. And the other one is what, like Clem, like I think, or Becky and Tanner. I mean, I think those are all that's by design, I would say.
it's
But
it's by
yeah.
design to like show the complexity of all this. I guess I maybe the grand sweep of history is in there, but I didn't find any of these characters muddy. I found them fully three-dimensional, at least the majority, maybe parts of Becky and Clem, like
Yeah.
you didn't experience as much. Like the book is basically Russ, Marion, and Perry's story. Like
Yeah. I think
the
Becky is like the least drawn character to me.
and there's a fourth child who like I think is literally just
Judson.
written about
Yeah.
like along with everyone else. Which is, you know, kind of like a family of four will like you'll experience that. But I don't know. I guess what this book ultimately did to me was show, and maybe if I didn't come from where I came from, like I wouldn't have felt this way. Like maybe this is like a Midwestern
Yeah.
kid's book. I don't know.
Right.
But like to me, these characters felt like people I had grown up alongside of. I'd seen various kids' parents struggle with, you know, marital issues and financial issues and what that did to them in a community where like you're really not allowed to like openly showcase struggle or openly showcase challenge. Like you really need to kind of um put on your best face no matter what's going on whenever you go outside. And like that internal tension plus the fact that like for as bad as the weather is in the Midwest, for as annoying as the nice people tend to be, for as many political and economic problems are across the larger Midwest, it is still a very nice place to come from. And that struggle and that challenge, I think probably can't fully be understood. Like, you know, the same way that like I'll never fully understand what it's like to be a New Yorker. I'll never
Mhm.
understand what it's like to be a Californian. Like I feel like I'm only beginning to understand what it's like to be someone who lives on the Front Range. Um, I know what it's like to be someone who comes from the Midwest and be like, I got to get the fuck out of here. And then you get the fuck out of there and you're like, I need to go back there because that was the good life. You know what I mean? So, like,
Yeah.
that constant struggle is something that he just nails in this book about that part of the world. Um, that to me it felt the opposite of muddy. It was as clear as possible.
Yeah, same. I always think about that because when I was in high school, you know, there was a group of us in varied different parts of the school. My class was probably like 250 kids. And there was always like a certain amount of us that wanted to get out. And it's interesting how almost all of them have gone back. Um, and only a few of us have actually stayed out, you know? So,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Well, I think we could probably talk about this book forever, but
Mhm.
I think we should wrap up. Is there anything thematically that we didn't get to talk about that you want to talk about?
No, I so here are my
Okay,
themes. Suburban
let's hear it.
America, the
Mhm.
1970s, divorce, drug use, isolation even while surrounded by family, religious
Mm.
awakenings, honesty, mental stability, adultery, and past lives. And I feel like we covered all of that.
All right, I like that. Did you have a lasting image from the book?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like when I found out that this book was written based off of the town I grew up in, and then I started like reading things he wrote about you know the main street and the train tracks in the middle of Main Street and the church with like the Dutch elms around it. Like I could physically feel it. So like the image of this was like the town I grew up in, and um, I sent this book to my mom and I was like, "You've got to read this. Like
Yeah.
this is literally like she's a huge reader and she'll take most of my recommendations." And the next time I got to my town was I don't know how much longer. I don't remember the next time I went home after read. Oh, it was like only like yeah, I finished reading this. No, I don't know actually now that I'm thinking about it. I have no idea that how long it took me to get home, but when I remember when I got home after reading this, I was just like I felt like I was back in the book.
Yeah, I love that. That it's the same for me. I grew up on a cul-de-sac and I kept picturing my cul-de-sac that I grew up on and my church, as I mentioned. I kept picturing like the parking lot to the church. It has this huge sloped parking lot in front of this like modernist church and the weather. I love the way Franzen writes about the weather. And if you grow up in Illinois or Indiana or Michigan, there's just something that's very intense about the weather. And I felt like he really did that beautifully in this book. So,
Totally.
what an awesome book. I'm so glad we finally got to talk about Franzen. Are there any books, movies that you'd recommend that are similar or evocative?
It's funny because typically this is the segment where we recommend a Franzen book.
Exactly. Now we're
I mean,
screwed.
I think I'm gonna push this again because I think it's just it's really it hits home. Ohio, by why can't I remember this author's name? Stephen Markley, which is a very Midwestern modern book. I think also this is like kind of the most stereotypical movie to recommend as a result of this, but whatever. It's a Wonderful Life really hits at
Mm,
the themes of this overall book and like the tragedies, the minor tragedies of living in a place like this and like quintessential quaint, um, small town America, Main Street America, but how when you realize that you could lose that, what that ultimately does to you.
yeah, I like those comps. I was thinking a lot about White Noise by Don DeLillo just because I think there's so many similar ties to it. He's a much funnier writer, but I think they share a sensibility. I think also, obviously, we always say the bee sting, but definitely if you like this, you would love the bee sting. Um, as far as a movie, I think that it's more of a satire, but I think American Beauty, it reminds me a lot of this
Mm.
book. So that's something I'd probably recommend. But there's a million things that I think are tangentially related, because there's so much that he covers, as you mentioned when you listed themes. It's just a massive book. So we're going to be back next week, I believe, and we're talking about a George Saunders short story, right?
Yeah, next week we are talking about the Simplica Girl Diary from 10th of December. So if you have not read that in some time or at all, I highly, highly recommend it. It is a fascinating read. The whole series is great, but then that story in particular is something else. So definitely come back and check that out.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. We've also posted all the books, short stories, and movies we're going to be talking about so people can follow us. Go to osirispod.com/podcasts and select library card, and you'll see our schedule for the years on a link there. And thanks so much for engaging with us. Thanks for the voicemail. That was awesome. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate the support and engagement. And until next time, happy reading.